It's been over 100 years since the fall of the legendary Camelot. Now just a mist-shrouded ruin where the living dare not tread. But now the shadows of a half-forgotten past have begun to stir, and you are all that stands between the people of Albion and the darkness that now gathers in the north. Hey folks, I'm William, this is Runeforged, and today I am very excited to announce Shadows of Camelot, my new post-Arthurian campaign setting for Shadowdark RPG. And I've been hard at work for the last several months on this project, and I'm very excited to share it with you today. In this video, I'll give you an overview of the supplement, and we'll do a quick flip through of the PDF version of Shadows of Camelot, as well as the various different extras that are included along with it. And as always, there will be a link down in the video description where you can pick this up for yourself if you are so inclined. And as a special thank you, if you pick this up before July 26th, you'll be able to get your copy for 33% off. But without further ado, let's dive into Shadows of Camelot. All right, let's start with an overview of Shadows of Camelot. What you're looking at right now is the DriveThruRPG page for this supplement, and by the time you're watching this video, it will be live and ready to go. As I mentioned, for the first couple weeks, you'll be able to pick this up for $9.99 US, and then after that, it will be $14.99. And just kind of reading the description here, it says, Shadows of Camelot is a noble dark campaign setting that integrates the story of King Arthur and Robin Hood with Shadowdark's default setting. And it's designed to take characters from level 1 to 10. So you can play a full campaign in this campaign setting if you are so inclined. And that's exactly what I did with my group, and we had an absolutely fantastic time. All right, so Shadows of Camelot is an 82-page, fully hyperlinked PDF with everything you need to run a post-Arthurian campaign in the realm of Albion. And that includes 27 thematic points of interest, including the mysterious Isle of Avalon and the mist-shrouded ruins of Camelot. Also, there are dozens of new and familiar foes, including the Green Knight, the Questing Beast, and the Fell Enchantress Morgana Le Fay. There are also several powerful new magical items, including Merlin's Staff, a cursed version of Excalibur, and the legendary Divine Chalice, which is this world's analog for the Holy Grail. There's also a level 1 adventure called Tomb of the Headless Knight, which is designed to introduce players to the setting of Albion. There are also rules for charity, which kind of act as a replacement for the carousing system, and attempts to essentially reflavor those rules to be more friendly to the more noble dark setting that is present in Shadows of Camelot. There's also a relatively concise overview of the most relevant bits of Albion's history, including the fall of Camelot and what happened in its aftermath. There are also 37 incredible pieces of old school inspired art from a variety of talented artists, including Runehammer, The Basic Expert, and Dean Spencer, and also many, many more besides them. In addition to the PDF, you'll also get several standalone image files that include both player and GM-facing versions of the maps that you'll need to run this campaign, including the overall setting map as well as the map of the dungeon that's featured in the level 1 adventure. And by the time this goes live, there should be a preview function available on this page, which will allow you to see the entire contents of the PDF before you purchase it. And if that's all the information you need, again, the link to pick up Shadows of Camelot for yourself will be included down in the video description. But if you'd like to see a little bit more, let's go ahead and start our flip through of Shadows of Camelot. All right, so I've got the 82-page PDF pulled up here in front of me right now. And as you can see, it is fully bookmarked, so you can jump easily to any of the sections listed over here on the right-hand side. Also, each entry on the table of contents is hyperlinked, so you can quickly and easily jump back and forth to wherever you need to go. It starts off with a one-page introduction to kind of get the GM up to speed on what's going on with this PDF, and it also includes a link to some of my other work. Other than that, this page mostly just talks about the things that we covered in the overview. Next, we've got a quick one-page overview that covers the setting of Albion. I'm going to go ahead and read it for you verbatim, but please feel free to skip to the next section if you don't want to hear me reading. It's been over a century since the fall of the legendary Camelot, now just a mist-shrouded ruin where the living dare not tread. Unknown to most, the now undead King Arthur still sits on his crumbling throne, cursed with unlife by the fell sorceress Morgana Le Fay, as revenge for killing her son, Mordred. Magical wards prevent Arthur and his forces from escaping, but those wards are rapidly deteriorating. Richard, the current king of Albion, is away on crusade in distant lands. No one knows when, or even if, he will return. In the king's absence, his inept younger brother, Prince John, acts as steward of Richard's throne at Caerlewen, which sits in the long, dark shadow of the once great Camelot. In the face of a poor harvest and wasteful spending, Prince John has levied harsh taxes on the peasantry, leading them to the edge of starvation and revolt. Stoking the flames of rebellion is the bandit lord, Robert the Green, sometimes referred to as the Robin Hood. Meanwhile, the Inquisition of St. Pyre scours the realm for signs of witchcraft, willing to put entire villages to the torch. The Inquisition has not yet discovered the secrets harbored by the monks of St. Emrys, inheritors of Merlin's arcane legacy. But the Inquisition's watchful eye prevents the monks from maintaining the wards that safeguard the realm. As a result, the shadows of a half-forgotten past have begun to stir. The dead grow restless in Camelot, and Morgana closes in on the fabled divine chalice, which she will use to resurrect Mordred and grant him near godlike powers. Then, if not stopped, Morgana will launch an all-out assault on the Southlands, crushing any who dare to oppose her. So that's kind of the brief one-page summary of the setting. And if you'd like to see some additional information on the history of Albion, there is a link to page 79 where that information is housed. Over here on the right-hand side, we see a hex map for the region of Albion, broken down into the 4 major regions: the Southlands, the Wilderlands, the Feywood, and of course the Mists of Camelot. And also in this map are the clearly labeled 27 points of interest, which we'll talk about in just a minute. And of course, these are all 6-mile hexes, in accordance with the core Shadowdark rules for hex crawling. Next, we've got kind of an optional section that gives some hints and tips about how you might structure your campaign. Now, when I ran this campaign for my own group, I did run it as more of a narrative style campaign with a classic 3-act structure. And that's kind of the information that I've given on this page. Now, I know a lot of you in the old school community aren't super excited about narrative campaigns necessarily, so I just want to assure you this campaign does run just fine as a traditional sandbox. And you really shouldn't have to make that many, if any, changes in order to get it to function in that way. It's really more adding on these additional narrative elements if you want to do that for your game. I am going to briefly run through this section, but again, if you're not interested in more narrative play, feel free to skip it and move on to the next thing. All right, so Act 1 kind of starts in the Southlands of Albion, and the campaign assumes that you're going to be starting in the village of Noxley. Now, you can definitely hang around in Noxley for a little bit, talk to some of the locals, get a feel for what's going on, or if you just kind of want to jump right into the action, you can start with the level 1 adventure, Tomb of the Headless Knight. And there is a link that will take you directly there if you want to skip to that section. After completing that initial dungeon, it's very likely that PCs will continue to explore the Southlands and interact with the various different NPCs and factions in that area. And that'll include Lord Robert, aka the Robin Hood, as well as his merry men. There's also the forces of Prince John, as well as his lackey, the Sheriff of Noxley, and also the monks of St. Emrys, as well as St. Pyre's Inquisition, who we referenced a bit earlier in the campaign setting overview. Eventually, the characters will likely continue to journey further north into the Wilderlands, and that would be the natural starting point for Act 2, and the recommended level for that is around level 5, although you could theoretically go earlier as long as you are cautious and careful in the way that you handle your approach. Act 2 really covers the Northlands, and that's going to be a combination of the Wilderlands and the Fey Woods. And as the PCs continue journeying in the area, they'll run into the various different factions in those regions, including the mysterious Lord and Lady of the Hunter's Hall, who are definitely willing to offer a safe haven, but they've definitely got some secrets of their own. The players may also run into Beastkin or Dark Fae loyal to Morgana as they continue their search for the fabled divine chalice. There's also the ancient Fomorian emperor, known as Baelor, who was imprisoned by St. Pyre long ago beneath the mountain that now bears his name. And you may recognize a reference to classic Celtic mythology, and you will see a creature vaguely resembling that here in the bestiary section of this book. And finally, in this area, there's also the mysterious Druids of the North, who work in secret with the monks of St. Emrys to maintain the wards that safeguard the realm against various supernatural threats like Morgana and Arthur. Eventually, the PCs may run afoul of Morgana's minions and learn of her plans, and that may lead the PCs into a race to find the divine chalice before she does, or they may decide to confront her directly at her stronghold of Dol Morwen, either to face her in combat, or maybe even to broker an alliance against the Southlands. That's a decision that will lie entirely with you and your players. Dealing with Morgana in whatever fashion is the natural catalyst to begin Act 3, the Mists of Camelot, at which point the wards around Camelot will finally shatter, and Arthur's undead legions will spill forth into the realm, destroying every living creature they find. There are many possible ways to resolve this issue. A direct assault on Camelot with all the PC's allies is possible, but they should take care, for Arthur is even stronger in death than he was in life. A wish spell cast on Arthur while he's at 0 hit points, or 2 sips from the divine chalice, would be enough to end his curse. But is Arthur still worthy of such a blessing? And what would happen if he took that final forbidden sip that imbued him with near divine power. Could he still be trusted to rule the realm, or would he finally become the tyrant that Morgana believed he was all along? But there is another way. Above all, Arthur yearns to reconcile with his beloved Guinevere and Lancelot, whose spirits, unknown to Arthur, also still linger in Albion. If they were able to make amends even now, Arthur and the realm may finally come to know a true and lasting peace. Next, we've got about 4 pages of random encounter tables that are split up between the various major regions of Albion. And if you are familiar with Arthurian legend, you will see quite a few familiar faces on this list, and a couple new entries as well. And like the rest of the PDF, each one of these entries is hyperlinked, so you can jump directly to the page that you need to get to. And like I said, there's about 4 pages of these random encounters, hopefully more than enough variety to take you from levels 1 to 10. Also, I did want to note that I reprinted the relevant entries from the core Shadowdark bestiary into this document to make it easier for you to navigate and not have to flip as often between the Shadowdark rules and the Shadows of Camelot PDF. I think this is a great time to shout out Kelsey Dion of the Arcane Library. 1, for making the fantastic game that is Shadowdark, and 2, for creating the incredible Shadowdark creator license that allowed this book to be created in the first place. So thank you, Kelsey. All right, next we get into the Albion points of interest, and these are essentially 27 locations in the setting of Albion where there is something particularly interesting going on. And again, I'm not going to spend too much time on any individual section, but as we scroll through here, you should see plenty of familiar names and places if you are familiar with the Arthurian legend. And there's also a couple ones that are a little bit more obscure, so definitely let me know if you've caught any of those more obscure references. Again, I'm just going to keep going through here. We got some gorgeous looking old school art here from a variety of different talented artists. I think there's like 37 pieces of unique art throughout the entire book. And again, I'm just scrolling through this very quickly, but definitely feel free to pause and read over any that you want to see in more detail. And of course, it all ends with the ruins of Camelot. You know, the once shining jewel of Arthur's kingdom, now only a crumbling ruin where the living dare not tread. And, consumed by anguish, the now undead King Arthur sits brooding on his crumbling throne. Even stronger now than he was in life, he would be an almost unbeatable opponent. The curse laid on him by Morgana, in combination with some of his darker deeds later in life, has left Arthur cold and bitter. But, as we touched on earlier, there are ways to remove Arthur's curse. Some of them may involve a direct confrontation with Arthur himself, but there are also non-combat approaches to take as well, which is all well and good because, as we referenced, Arthur is a bit of a beast in combat and has a surprise or two up his sleeve that your players probably are not expecting. Next, we move into the section on carousing and charity. As I referenced earlier, charity is more of like a reskin or a reflavor of the existing carousing system, and is designed to be a better tonal fit with the more noble dark setting of Shadows of Camelot. Now, I've done the best that I can to try and keep these two systems as relatively balanced as possible, while slightly changing the tone to be a better match for the setting. Also, one thing that's pretty interesting is that on this table, there are very setting-specific events that can happen as a result of rolling on the charity table. Now, some of those are really bad, like hearing the baying hounds of the questing beast, which could drive a person mad and have some negative effects in them until they get that resolved. Or they can be very positive things, like having visions of very important locations within the world, like the Hunter's Hall or even the Isle of Avalon, which, don't tell anybody, is the secret resting place of the legendary Divine Chalice. Next, we've got several different pages of friends and foes. And these are really going to be the NPCs and monsters that your characters are going to run into on their journeys throughout Albion. And again, you're going to see a lot of familiar faces here, and a lot of spoilers here as well for the true identity of certain individuals that you might run into in the campaign. So be on the lookout for that. Again, this is where a majority of the art in this book is going to be in this section. And I think there's some really awesome old school inspired art here, again, by a variety of very talented artists. And speaking of talented artists, John Torres, the basic expert, I commissioned this piece from him for the Green Knight, and I could not be happier with how it turned out. And I did just want to take a second that I know that this probably looks like a lot of text for a single monster, but just rest assured, this entire section over here, one, I had to include the iconic Green Knights challenge, and I wanted to give that some mechanical weight, but this is something that's going to happen before any other combat breaks out. So when you're actually fighting the Green Knight, if you end up fighting him, there's not really that much mechanics that you have to deal with when you're running that encounter. So don't panic. I know it looks like a lot of text, but I promise it's not that bad when you actually run it. We continue scrolling here, and we finally get to King Arthur himself. Again, there is some fantastic art for King Arthur done by Hankerin Furnail over at Runehammer, which you probably saw on the front cover of Shadows of Camelot, and I'll show it again here in just a minute. And I believe this dragon was done by Dean Spencer, but don't quote me on that. But regardless, we've got a full set of rules here for King Arthur, and he is very much meant to be a very dangerous opponent. And in addition to all of the magical items that you might expect him to have from the legend, he also has a very large surprise up his sleeve, and that is that he actually rides on an undead version of the Dragon of Albion. So in addition to fighting the already very scary King Arthur, we'll likely have to fight him on his mount, which is very scary. But perceptive characters may notice that there is a weak point in the dragon's armor, and they might be able to exploit that in order to defeat the beast, with enough resources left over to then defeat Arthur himself. And as we continue to scroll here, you can see a variety of other important NPCs, including Lord Robert, aka Robin Hood, and his merry men. And this should be most of the ones that you're expecting to see from Robin Hood, and a couple others that maybe are a little bit more of a surprise. All right, moving on here. Next, we've got a very nasty little spread here that includes both Morgana Le Fay and her currently deceased son, Mordred. Although if she does manage to get a hold of the Divine Chalice, Mordred will return as a level 30 powerhouse of a creature, and he will be extremely difficult to deal with. And a lot of the mechanical design for Mordred was inspired by this wonderful piece of art right here. The name of the artist escapes me, I apologize, but hopefully I'll remember to put it up on the screen. But yeah, so I saw this image like, yes, that looks a lot like a Mordred that I could use. And then the rest of the design was very much informed by that piece of art. But yeah, both of these very much meant to be in-game bosses for Shadows of Camelot along with Arthur. And they will prove to be very powerful foes. So your players may have to be a little bit creative in terms of how they choose to deal with these potential enemies or maybe allies, depending on how they decide to play it. And we continue scrolling here. A ton of creatures here and NPCs. Again, lots of art. Yep, and that kind of brings us to the end of the friends and foes section. And next we move into Trinkets and Treasures. And these are basically all of the cool and very powerful magical items that your players might encounter as they adventure in Albion. Again, there's probably some familiar names here for folks who are familiar with Arthurian legend, including the Divine Chalice, which is probably the most powerful item listed in this book. And again, 3 steps from this can grant someone near divine power. And that would be really interesting to see if a player decides that, saving Arthur, maybe not the priority. They want to become, a little bit more godlike than they already are. Probably around level 10 is when they can expect to get that item, if they can find it. And we've also got a corrupted or cursed version of Excalibur, which is always very exciting. We've also got several different items tied to the various different Knights of the Round Table, like Galahad. We've also got something tied to Guinevere, which is very interesting. And then, of course, we've got a corrupted version of Merlin's Staff, which is currently wielded by the fearsome Morgana Le Fay. And then also we have these dual greatswords here that Mordred uses, because that's what the artwork showed. Some of them have some cool Arthurian flavor, and the other one over here is more of a nod to another one of my favorite fantasy settings. Definitely let me know what you think this is referencing if you know what it is. So just several different pages of hopefully very cool magical items for you to use in your game. Next, we come to the level 1 introductory adventure, the Tomb of the Headless Knight. And again, this is really just meant to be an introduction to the overall setting. It could be an introduction to Lord Robert and his merry men if you decide that you want to go that route. But it also lets the players know by the end of the dungeon that this is also set in the world of King Arthur. So you could kind of spring it on them as a little bit of a surprise, which is what I did in my game. We've also got the GM-facing version of the dungeon map for this adventure included here. And then there's also standalone images, which we'll talk about at the end, that have both the GM and player-facing version. Again, just your very standard kind of level 1 adventure. One thing that I did try to do was to put any of the relevant stat blocks here directly on the page, so you don't have to do a lot of flipping back and forth as you're running this adventure. So yeah, hopefully everything that you would need to run a particular encounter is on a single 2-page spread, other than like the random encounter stuff. Also, I put a section here at the end that includes some possible next steps for how to continue on with the campaign after this initial session. So yeah, hopefully it acts as a very good starting point for your campaign. And then finally here, we've got like a relatively brief 4 pages that has the relevant history for the lands of Albion, including how I tied this in to the default Shadowdark setting. And then some additional information about the rise of Arthur, the fall of Camelot, and what happened in the aftermath. So that kind of brings us to the end of the PDF. Let's dive into some of the extra content that's also included. All right, so in terms of the extras that are included, I've also put in an image file of the cover for the book. Again, some fantastic artwork done by Hankerin Furnail / Brandon Gillum of Runehammer. I think he did an absolutely fantastic job with this piece. I literally could not be happier with it. He also managed to knock it out in like 2 days, which was absolutely phenomenal. This was kind of the last piece that I was waiting on in order to launch Shadows of Camelot. And yeah, there's just not enough nice things I can say about it. You know, if you need some commissioned work done, you know, I highly recommend both him and John Torres, the basic expert. But yeah, so you get an image of the front cover of the book, just in case you want it for your collection, or maybe if you want to print this off and put it all together in a book, that is an option for you to do. Next, we've got a variety of different maps that are relevant to the campaign, starting off with the GM-facing version of the regional map for Albion. Shout out to my friend Ian, who helped me kind of put this together. I did like a rough outline, but then he went back and made it look a lot more realistic and a lot nicer looking than what I had originally. So thank you, Ian. Next, we've got the player-facing version of the regional map for Albion without all of the labels on there. So hopefully this is, you know, usable for them. Next, we've got the GM-facing black and white version of the dungeon map for the level 1 adventure, followed by the player-facing version with the labels removed. And then we've also got color variants of that map as well. But yeah, so that is Shadows of Camelot. It's absolutely been a labor of love these last few months, and I am genuinely very happy that I've been able to get this out and share it with you today. If you'd like to pick up a copy for yourself, there will be a link to do so down in the video description. And if you do decide to pick it up on or before July 26th, you will get a pretty hefty discount. And if you do decide to pick it up, I would definitely appreciate it if you left me a review on DriveThruRPG. It actually helps quite a bit, especially for folks that aren't necessarily familiar with, you know, my previous work. Finally, if you did enjoy this video, please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel. I imagine this will not be the last piece of Shadowdark content that I publish, and I always try to do a video to align with the release of any new content. Also, I do plan to do a video a little over a month from now that kind of goes over how much money I spent making the adventure, as well as how much the adventure made in those first 30 days. Because I know some folks are definitely interested in more of the business side of things, and I'm always curious what other creators are doing as well. But I think that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day. Bye.